Today we're going to look at how Origins changed refining, as the No Man's Sky Origins update did take away a few things that survival and permadeath saves used to rely on for storing mass resources. But don't worry, there are alternatives, so today I'm going to go through the primary refining recipes you are going to want to use from here on out, just a few tips for sitting pretty in the verse. Now, I'm on this survival save, which is an unbuilt piece of, well, as you can see out there, it's just not finished. But I'm on here because we have, on this save, a bunch of these. Now, I used to use these as storage before Origins patch because they were great for it. So essentially, to put it down to the ultimate base, I could essentially store in one of these slots 3,000 instead of 1,000 of each of these items for these rare metal elements, superoxide crystal and so forth, which is why I kept them. We have tetracobalt, rare metal element, superoxide crystal, carbon crystal, chloride lattice and destabilized sodium. These all represent 150 of their respective tier 2 items. So tetracobalt is ionized cobalt, this is pure ferrite, this is oxygen, which is different to the tier 2 but still a really good way to store condensed oxygen on a survival or permadeath save. We've got condensed carbon from carbon crystal, we've got chlorine from chloride lattice, and we've got sodium nitrate from destabilized sodium. They've now removed these items, which takes away the infinity loops, and unfortunately anyone who's using these items as storage, like myself, has now just lost all those resources. All you can do with these is just sell them. And they don't really go for that much, they go for way more if they are the base resource. But there are alternatives, and that's what we're going to go over today. So to do this, let's jump over to my normal mode save. So here we are on my normal mode save. This save has an actual built freighter, which is fully stocked with loads of stuff and whatnot. Let's go up to this one. The refinery is that way, but up here we have plants and stuff, and that will actually become a thing in this video. So essentially, we do still have one infinite loop. Now that is oddly, I'm surprised they left it in, but I suppose it takes so long to do, it's even longer than the other ones. This, to an extent, this is dihydrogen. So here I've got a bunch of dihydrogen here. I can essentially just bring this into my slots. I can craft this into dihydrogen jelly. So let's just make 5. These dihydrogen jelly cost 40 to make. This costs 40 dihydrogen to make 1. Now if we go to refiner, we can refine each dihydrogen jelly into 50. So the ratio is 1 to 50. Now, even more interestingly, if we just turn that back into dihydrogen, so now we've essentially turned 200 dihydrogen into 250. If we put that back in there, it's actually 30 to 1 to refine it back to jelly, but this does take a while. As you can see here, we can make 8 and it takes a minute each. So it's not like this is too overpowered. But if they're thinking of removing certain things to do with this, I would just request that they just make the crafting recipe 50 instead of 40, at which point it's not an infinite loop through that. It is through this, but this takes so long that it's kind of, you've paid your dues with this, in my opinion. So yeah, that's just a request if they are considering taking that one away, as well as if they just missed it. But that is still there. That's the only infinity loop left as far as refining goes, but there are lots of other things you can do with refining still, which were always around. So essentially the chlorine loop. So if we go into the large refiner, we get some chlorine, which I was really happy to find out I actually did have some. That would have been annoying. And oxygen, you can still make 6 chlorine from 1 chlorine and 2 oxygen. Now, this isn't like an infinity loop, this is multiplication through oxygen, which has been around since the start of refining and is a very useful thing. Oxygen is extremely cheap, chlorine is quite expensive. So this 2,257 chlorine is 1.3 million. The oxygen, that's almost 10,000, is only 333,000. Not only that, but you are increasing your items by double. So the chlorine loop is a well-known method for making units early on a save. So you basically just, as soon as you got the medium refiner, you can do the chlorine loop and just use oxygen to multiply chlorine in a sense, and then basically just sell all that chlorine. This also enables us to get salt. Now salt is used in a great many things. So if we just refine a few bits of this salt, that's enough, and then put that chlorine back in. If we find any crop, so here we've got some cactus flesh, so salt and cactus flesh, 1 salt, 2 cactus flesh makes 1 pyrite. Now pyrite being the biomaterial for dusty, cactusy desert planets, and cactus flesh is the crop for that. So you can probably make the jump there. So if you take star bramble or something, have we got some of that? We should have pretty much everything in it. So like here, fungal mold is toxic, that makes ammonia. So star bramble is paraffinium, gamma root makes uranium, and so forth. So basically you can make these 6 biomaterials with salt. And as we've shown, we can make salt with oxygen. So the clincher here is oxygen. The condensed carbon and oxygen still work, so condensed carbon with oxygen will still make 1 to 6 and 2 to 6 of these items. This works with the low materials as well, so I may not have carbon on me, but I do have that salt we just made. So salt makes 2 salt and 2 oxygen instead of 1 chlorine and 2 oxygen to 5 instead of 6. So it's just a slightly less efficient version of that, but it's still very useful. And it's the same with carbon. So carbon 2 oxygen makes 5. Condensed carbon. Now, if we take into consideration that oxygen is the clincher here, and we can make most items, like you can't make tritium. And by the way, you can use dihydrogen with a bunch of items as well, instead of where oxygen can't be used to make more of those items. And don't forget that you can get dihydrogen on a freighter in a closed system from green trays. You can get condensed carbon from these as well, but if we go focus on the green trays, I have a bunch of this is my cargo room with ensuite exocraft summoner. So yeah, these ones can sometimes give the dihydrogen jelly. Let's just do it until we get it to confirm, because I haven't actually confirmed this since Origins came in. I have enough where I should be able to get at least 1. Ion batteries. It also gave me life support gel, which is pretty swoosh. More life support gel, come on. Are we going to get a dihydrogen jelly? Microprocessor, that's not what I'm looking for. Let's just go through all of them and hope that we get one. Yes, and there we go, we got a dihydrogen jelly. So you can still get dihydrogen jelly from these green trays. And you only need 1 to do that loop if you so choose to do it. So that is still something you can get on. You can make deuterium with tritium and dihydrogen, but that of course requires you to have the tritium, so that's a finite resource. As far as I'm aware, I can't be 100% on this, but I don't think you can get tritium from terminals on your freighter, which is an odd one. I personally think you probably should be able to, consider it's a freighter which uses tritium for frigate fuel and so forth. So tritium is one of the only ones that you cannot get through any means of refining. But as I said before, oxygen is the clincher. Now, oxygen is a finite resource in these closed loops. You can't make it, you can't produce it indefinitely. So you have to bring it in, no matter what. And what you bring in is finite and used, whereas, chlorine, condensed carbon, you can just make more. So, what is the best way to store oxygen in your freighter to then use whenever you want to? And that answer is kelp sack. Now this might sound a bit crazy, but kelp sack can be turned into oxygen. And this makes sense because, you use kelp sack when you're underwater to actually refill your oxygen meter. Now I'm going to actually show you this just in person, but I haven't actually got any kelp sack because I kind of still dislike kelp sack from back in Atlas Rises when we had to farm it like mad just to make landing pads with weatherproof rubber. So I I think I will regain a like for kelpsack using this method on my survivals and permadeaths. So we just need some nitrogen, if I can find that anywhere. There we go. I look at it. I have some of almost everything in my storage, so I've got some nitrogen there. So we can make kelpsack using nitrogen and salt. Now you might be thinking, oh great, that means we can just keep making kelpsack in a closed loop. Unfortunately, nitrogen is the clincher on that one. It's a finite resource. You can only make a nitrogen on a sort of downward sloping ratio, and it requires another of the gases to make, and we cannot farm the three main gas of nitrogen, sulfur and radon in space. So unfortunately, if you have like sulfurine or radon, you could work through the different gases to get to nitrogen so you can make your kelpsack, but otherwise, unfortunately, it's a no-go. So if we use kelpsack, we also get some condensed carbon, and then the last one is this makes 1 to 2, but the next one's better. If you get any of the farmable crop, which is very easy to produce on a freighter, we can make oxygen at 1 to 10. So this makes kelpsack an extremely good thing to store as a survival or permadeath player in your storage. Just have like several stacks of it, because then you can just, when you need oxygen, which granted is easy to get, but sometimes you don't want to have to go to the space station. You just want to be able to do it on your freighter and not have to go elsewhere and waste time. So essentially just pick any of your flowers, just make sure you're growing a farmable crop of the 6 main biome ones on your freighter. Make sure you have either some condensed carbon, which you can then multiply with this oxygen, or just some red barrels, which condensed carbon regularly drops from. And then the kelpsack, and you have yourself a bunch of pretty easy oxygen. It's not the quickest, but you could, I mean, it's pretty quick considering you're doing like 10 at once. So then you could just leave this to go while you're sorting the other things for whatever you're making, and then come back and you have a bunch of oxygen. So this here is my sort of revamped little tips guide on how you can really use refiners in mostly closed systems on freighters now. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it's helped you in your game. Be sure to check out the pinned comment for a link to my website, which has a full list of all the refiner recipes in a big table that is searchable and very useful for when you're doing anything really refinery. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing to Xaine's World for more guides, let's plays, little tips, tricks, videos like this. And yeah, we've got a Discord, got a website, got a Patreon, got a YouTube memberships if you want to help support, and even a merch store with some cool Team Gek, Viking and Korvax tees. Thank you everyone, and big thanks to my patrons and members who without making these videos would be quite a bit more tricky. So thank you and have an amazing day. Catch you next time.